Well, I spent the morning in Croydon, meeting local residents, meeting youth workers, community leaders, police officers and others. That's a community shocked, traumatised and heartbroken, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say our thoughts are with this young child's family and their friends. I know, as you said, Pastor Lorraine incredibly well, and she's right. We're having to do what we can to invest in communities because the government's made massive cuts to organisations like Pastor Lorraine's. I've been to Dynamics. Lorraine does an amazing job keeping young people off the street. We supported her getting help from the council with their community centre. But with our finite resources, there's only so much we can do in Croydon. We've invested more than £2 million, giving young people things to do after schools, at weekends, during the school holidays. We've supported young people in Croydon to have mentors. We're encouraging 100,000 young people to have mentors over the course of the next couple of years. But look, you know, one death is one death too many. I'm unwilling, and I'll never write off young people. So we're going to carry on investing in young people, hopefully now with some support from the government.
Let's be clear, you're blaming government cuts for the increase in knife crime in London, are you?
Look, the responsibility for knife crime lays with the person doing the knife crime, but without excusing criminality. The causes are quite complex. They are to do with deprivation, alienation, a lack of opportunity, inequalities and so forth. So yes, of course, we've got to bear down on enforcement. More police officers are needed, more community support officers are needed. At the same time, we've got to give young people constructive things to do, particularly when we know knife crime is high, evenings, weekends and during the holidays, so they can flourish and thrive and have their potential fulfilled, rather than joining criminal gangs, getting involved in county lines and all the other things we know can happen when young people aren't supported.
We also heard from Donna Murray-Turner today, another campaigner in knife crime in the capital. She's asked about you. She said you need to start engaging in some uncomfortable conversations, and this is a societal problem. It's not just a black or a working class problem. Do you feel you have avoided conversations that should have been had?
Look, we've been working on this ever since I became mayor. I've often been criticised for making the point that there are consequences of austerity, from youth clubs closing down, youth workers losing their jobs, lack of after-school clubs, fewer police officers, lack of police staff and so forth. But we've been going into communities and supporting them because as somebody who's come from a working class background on a council estate, I know the difference a helping hand can make, from a good youth worker to a good teacher to a big brother that's supportive. We can't afford to be writing off any young person, let alone whole generations. I'm going to carry on working with these communities. We've got the country's first violence reduction unit, providing mentors, after-school clubs, but also starting young. You can't wait until a young person gets involved in criminality. Start in their primary schools, work in the secondary schools, work with teachers, try and avoid young people being excluded in the first place. But if they are, work with the pupil referral units. Make sure there are things to do for children during the school holidays, after school, before school.
You say you're working day and night to end this scourge of knife crime, but we're only now in September and already 16 teenagers have been killed in the capital, which is more than were killed across the whole of last year. Do you accept that whatever it is that you're doing, it's failed?
Well, look, I start by saying, one death is one too many. Last year we saw a huge reduction in the number of teenage homicides, almost 50% reduction. It's still too high. And this year we've seen, unfortunately, yesterday another young person losing her life, a child losing her life. But I'm never going to give up in relation to supporting young people, giving them constructive things to do, at the same time bearing down in relation to those who carry a knife, those who carry an offensive weapon, those who think it makes them safer leaving home with a knife, those who think under the misapprehension that the way to avoid being the victim of crimes by carrying a knife. We've got to make sure they understand if you leave home with a knife, you're more likely to be the victim of a knife crime rather than being safer. And if anybody knows anybody carrying a knife, it could be a younger brother, a younger sister, it could be a son, daughter, nephew, niece. If you can't persuade them to leave the knife at home, you can ring the police on 101 or ring Crime Stoppers. That will be the best way, the best thing you can do to keep them safe, and others.
You've written a book called Breathe, which was all about increasing the quality of the air around us. You've obviously campaigned and fought very hard for ULEZ. The Conservative MP Richard Holden has accused you today of focusing more on ULEZ than tackling knife crime. Do you regret the amount of time that you've spent on the ULEZ environmental campaign? Would perhaps not a book about tackling knife crime and reducing knife crime in London have been a better way to spend your time, do you think?
Can I say, if the Conservatives want to use the murder of a 15-year-old girl as a political football, that's up to them. I'm not willing to play ball. I'm quite clear.
Well, you yourself did blame the government cuts for an
this
increase in knife crime in London in your first answer.
I'm quite clear about the consequences of austerity. I've been campaigning since 2016 to end austerity, to invest in not just the police and the criminal justice system, but to invest in young people, in youth workers, in teachers, in schools, in mentors. The sorts of things we're doing from City Hall with one hand tied behind our back. It is really important that we bear down on this issue, and I will continue to do so. At the same time, we've got to make sure that we address other issues our city is facing, from a global pandemic, from which we're trying to bounce back as a city, from issues around transport, making sure we've got a decent deal from the government so we can have public transport running in our city, from addressing the air quality crisis that exists in our city, incredibly important, to make sure we encourage businesses to come to our city, at the same time making sure we build enough genuinely affordable homes, lobbying the government for more powers and resources, trying to persuade the government the folly of having a high-speed 2 line ending at Old Oak Common 6 miles west of the centre of London rather than Euston. You know, a mayor's going to be able to do all those things at the same time as making sure our city is safe. The number one priority for me as mayor is to make sure our city is safe, and that includes protecting young children from violent crime.
Will anything change as a result of this 16th death this year?
Well, look, every day we're working with some brilliant youth workers, some brilliant community leaders, some brilliant young people to transform their lives. The really good news is when I was speaking to one of the youth leaders this morning from Croydon, he made the point that because of our investment from the Violence Reduction Unit, because of our investment from City Hall with mentors in Croydon, there's now been almost 2 years without a teenager losing their life. No consolation, by the way, for any young person who's a victim of crime. But that's just a consequence of our investment in Croydon and other parts of our city as well. So we're going to carry on investing in young people. We're going to carry on investing in youth workers, after-school clubs, clubs at the weekends, things for young people to do during the summer holidays, at the same time supporting our police. And by the way, it's really important I recognise the great work of our police yesterday, bus drivers yesterday, passers-by yesterdays, and many others who gave CPR, who supported those watching the horrific murder that took place yesterday. Yes, yesterday was a horrific day, just an awful day, and we saw the worst of our city yesterday with the brutal killing of this child. We also saw some remarkable things from our police officers, our bus drivers, passers-by, and others as well.
Do you think the problem of knife crime in London is fixable?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's really important, you know, central government, me as the mayor, local councils, youth workers, the police, teachers, everyone works together to solve this problem. You know, there's the famous proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. I think we can, end violence against young people, just like we can end violence against women and girls. Look, crime isn't inevitable. Crime is preventable. And that's why I feel so passionately about this, because I'm somebody who, from a deprived community, from the background of some of these young people who get involved in criminality, managed to find a different pathway with the support of neighbours, youth workers, teachers, my parents, and many, many others. And I want other young Londoners to have the same helping hand that I had.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, thank you for joining us today.